Big Homie finally cracked, and that's why this clip got the whole internet on edge. 4 years, Jay-Z moved like a ghost, letting 50 Cent talk reckless with no response. Jokes about Beyoncé, jabs about Grammys, slick comments about power, contracts, and who really pulling strings in hip-hop. And every single time, Jay stayed silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that makes people wonder what's really being hidden behind closed doors. But now there's footage. And the energy feels different. Not loud. Not messy. Just sharp enough to let you know something shifted. Folks watching it back like, hold up. Is this Jay finally addressing 50? Because when you rewind the tape, line it up with everything 50's been saying for the past 2 years, the timing don't feel accidental. This ain't just two rappers trading shots. This is about power. About gatekeeping. About who gets invited to the biggest stages and who almost got erased from history. The Super Bowl. The Grammys. The boardrooms y'all never see. And once you really sit with that, once you let it marinate, you start realizing this story way deeper than social media jokes. And that viral clip? That might be the first crack in a wall that's been standing for decades. For a long time, people treated this whole Jay-Z and 50 Cent situation like it was just noise. Internet jokes. Old beef. One dude trolling while the other stayed above it. But that's only if you're looking at it from the surface. Because underneath all that laughter and meme culture, there's been a quiet tension building. The kind that don't explode right away, the kind that waits until the stakes are bigger than music. And that's where this really starts. Because once Jay-Z stepped into that Roc Nation deal with the NFL back in 2019, the game changed completely. That wasn't just a partnership. That was a power grab. Overnight, Jay wasn't just a legend rapper or billionaire mogul. He became the guy who had real influence over the biggest stage in American entertainment. The Super Bowl halftime show isn't just a performance. It's a career stamp. It's legacy cementing. It's the difference between being remembered and being rewritten out of the story. So when people found out Roc Nation would be consulting on halftime shows, a lot of artists celebrated. They thought, finally, somebody from the culture in the room. Somebody who understands hip-hop. But others started paying attention to who wasn't in the room. And that's where 50 Cent's name kept popping up. Fast forward to Super Bowl 56 in 2022. On paper, it was perfect. Dre, Snoop, Eminem, Mary J., Kendrick. A West Coast-leaning celebration of hip-hop dominance. And when 50 popped out upside down during In Da Club, the crowd lost it. That moment instantly became iconic. But according to 50 himself, what we saw on TV almost didn't happen at all. Behind the scenes, 50 claims there was resistance. Not from the NFL at first, but from Jay-Z's side. According to him, Jay didn't want him included in the show. No explanation given. No official reason. Just a quiet, nah. Now let's pause right there. Because if you know the history, you know that ain't random. 50 and Jay's tension didn't start yesterday. It goes all the way back to the late 90s, when 50 was still hungry, reckless, and trying to get noticed at any cost. How to Rob wasn't just a song, it was a declaration. He name-dropped the whole industry, Jay-Z included. And Jay responded in classic HOV fashion. Dismissive, slick, and lethal. I'm about $1. What the F*** is 50 Cent? That one line set the tone for decades. From that point on, their rivalry never really turned into a full-blown diss war, but it also never disappeared. It just evolved. Jay climbed the corporate ladder. 50 climbed the charts. Then 50 got shot. Then 50 came back bigger than ever. Then Jay warned his artists that 50 was coming. Then they shared stages, commercials, even tours. But the tension? That stayed. So when 50 says Jay didn't want him on the Super Bowl stage, some people brushed it off as paranoia. Others said it sounded exactly like unfinished business. What made the allegation explode was Eminem. Because according to 50, Eminem stepped in and drew a hard line. Number 50. No Slim Shady. And suddenly the situation flipped. The NFL wasn't about to lose Eminem on the biggest night of the year. So 50 stayed. The show went on. Everybody smiled for the cameras. But here's the part that stuck with people. Nobody denied it. Jay didn't. Rock Nation didn't. The NFL didn't. No statements. No corrections. Just silence. And silence, in this industry, is loud. Years later, 50 started speaking more openly about it. On podcasts, on radio shows, on interviews where he didn't sound bitter, he sounded confused. Like he couldn't wrap his head around why the competition was still happening when nobody was dropping diss tracks or chasing chart positions. And that's when he said something that changed how people heard the story. He said the competition moved past music. According to 50, this wasn't about hits or relevance. This was about business, about television deals, about who's controlling narratives. His power universe was dominating cable. Jay was building media and partnerships of his own. Two empires. Same space. Different styles. And in 50's mind, once you start blocking opportunities instead of out-creating someone, that's when it stops being competition and starts being something else. Then came the Grammy talk. That's where things got uncomfortable. 50 started joking, but not really joking, that Jay's biggest contract wasn't Def Jam or Rockefeller. It was Beyoncé. That once Jay's image shifted, once he became part of a global power couple, the industry treated him differently. The awards came easier. The perception changed. The edges softened. To some fans, that sounded like hate. To others, it sounded like a critique of how the industry rewards safety over disruption. And then 50 took it further. He brought up Tupac. No Grammys. Massive influence. Changed the culture forever. Meanwhile, polished artists with the right relationships rack up trophies. Again, he wasn't just talking about Jay, he was talking about the system. Jay just happened to be the perfect example. Every time 50 spoke, the narrative grew. Jay as the gatekeeper. Jay as the silent chess player. Jay as the man who doesn't get his hands dirty but still decides outcomes. And then this new footage surfaces. Jay speaking. Calm. Controlled. Not emotional. But aware. And suddenly people are re-examining everything. Because when someone stays quiet for years and then finally lets something slip, it makes you wonder what pushed them there. Was it the Super Bowl accusations spreading again? The Grammy jokes gaining traction? The idea that fans were starting to see him not just as a mogul, but as a gatekeeper? Nobody knows for sure. And that uncertainty is exactly why this moment matters. Because this ain't about one clip. This is about a long memory. A rivalry that never needed diss tracks to survive. A Cold War that's been playing out through contracts, partnerships, and quiet decisions that shape careers. And the scariest part? If 50's right, even a little bit, then what we saw on that Super Bowl stage was just the version they let us see. And the real story? That's still happening where cameras aren't allowed. Because once you accept that this rivalry moved behind closed doors, you start noticing patterns you can't unsee. See, Jay-Z's power was never loud. He didn't need to argue on Instagram or trade diss records in 2022. His influence lived in boardrooms, contracts, and advisory roles that never showed up in headlines. Rock Nation wasn't just a label anymore. It was management, sports, entertainment, branding, and politics all rolled into one. When Jay sat at the table, decisions got made that shaped who was visible and who wasn't. And that's the exact kind of power 50 Cent has always side-eyed. Because 50 comes from a different mindset. He believes if you win publicly. Charts, ratings, numbers, receipts. That's why he flexes so hard about Power's viewership, Star's renewals, spin-offs, and network deals. To him, success should be measurable. And if somebody is blocking you while pretending they're neutral, that's when it becomes personal. After the Super Bowl, 50 didn't go on a rant immediately. He waited. He watched. And what he saw only made him talk more. Look at the years that followed. Roc Nation's relationship with the NFL kept growing. More influence. More creative control. More consulting. At the same time, certain artists stayed absent from major moments. Not just 50, other controversial, outspoken figures too. People who didn't fit neatly into the clean, corporate-friendly version of hip-hop. And that's when fans started asking uncomfortable questions. Who decides what hip-hop looks like on the biggest stages now? Who decides what's acceptable? Who decides which legends get celebrated and which ones get tolerated? Jay never answered those questions directly. He didn't have to. His silence let the machine keep moving. Meanwhile, 50 leaned into being the outsider. He made it clear he didn't want approval from institutions that never embraced the raw side of the culture anyway. He laughed at awards, mocked politics, took shots at industry hypocrisy. But the more he joked, the more serious the message underneath became. Because here's the part people forget. 50 tried to play the industry game early on. He signed deals. He did movies. He partnered with brands. But every time he felt boxed in, he burned the bridge instead of bowing. Jay did the opposite. He mastered the system. He became the system. And that contrast is why this tension never needed a diss track. Then there's Eminem. M's role in all this is bigger than people admit. He's one of the few artists respected by both street rap fans and corporate executives. And according to 50, when Eminem stepped in during the Super Bowl negotiations, it exposed something critical. Jay's power wasn't absolute. That's key. Because if Jay truly didn't mind 50 being there would have been no resistance to begin with. And if he did mind, but still had to back off because Eminem drew a line, that suggests limits. Limits Jay rarely bumps into. And limits threaten control. After that performance, public perception shifted in subtle ways. Fans celebrated the unity on stage, but behind the scenes, the narrative of Jay as the untouchable gatekeeper started gaining traction. Not in mainstream media, but in conversations, podcasts, comment sections, barbershops. You know, the places where culture actually talks. And then the Grammy conversations resurfaced. Jay-Z, the most Grammy-nominated artist of all time. Beyoncé, the most awarded artist ever. On paper, it's historic. But to critics, it started looking like proof of alignment. The closer you are to the institution, the more the institution rewards you. 50 didn't accuse Jay of cheating the system. He accused him of benefiting from it while pretending it's fair. That distinction matters. Because Jay's brand is built on hustle mythology. The idea that he outworked everyone. That he earned every seat at every table. And while that's true to an extent, the longer he stayed in those rooms, the more he became the door instead of the guy knocking. And doors decide who gets through. That's why 50's jokes sting more than diss tracks ever could. They challenge the image. They suggest that Jay didn't just win, he changed the rules once he got ahead. And if you're on the outside looking in, those jokes start sounding like warnings. Now look at the footage again. The clip everyone's talking about. Jay's expression. His wording. The timing. It's not defensive. It's not confrontational. It's measured. Almost careful. Like someone who knows people are finally connecting dots he hoped would stay scattered. And that's what makes this moment dangerous. Because once fans start questioning power instead of personalities, the conversation shifts. It's no longer, who's the better rapper? It's, who controls the culture? And that's a question Jay's never really had to answer publicly. 50, on the other hand, lives for that question. He thrives in chaos, in discomfort, in dragging the quiet stuff into the light and daring people to look at it. And even when he exaggerates, even when he trolls, the core of what he's saying keeps landing. That hip-hop didn't start as a boardroom product. That the culture wasn't built to be sanitized, curated, and approved by sponsors. That legends shouldn't need permission to be celebrated. So when Jay finally speaks, even indirectly, it doesn't end the conversation. It fuels it, because silence was his shield. And once that shield cracks, even a little, people start pushing. Harder questions, louder narratives, deeper scrutiny. And now the Cold War feels warmer than it's ever been. Because at this stage, it's not about winning. It's about legacy. About how history will remember who stood for control and who stood for disruption. And if this really is the beginning of Jay stepping out of the shadows to address the noise, then what comes next might force both sides to confront something neither one can spin away. And that's where this story gets even more uncomfortable. Because once power gets questioned publicly, the response is never accidental. At this stage, Jay-Z and 50 Cent aren't fighting for relevance. That battle ended years ago. They're fighting for definition. For who gets to define what hip-hop success actually looks like in the history books. And the reason this moment feels heavier than all the slick jokes and subtle jabs before it is because both men understand one truth. Legacy is the last currency that can't be bought. Jay's legacy has been carefully constructed, not just through music, but through symbolism. The billionaire narrative, the art collections, the Basquiat comparisons, the partnerships with institutions that once rejected hip-hop altogether. Jay isn't just proving he made it, he's proving hip-hop belongs in elite spaces, museums, corporate summits, political conversations, the Super Bowl. And that mission matters. There's no denying that. But 50's problem has never been the mission. It's the cost. Because every time hip-hop gets invited into those spaces, something gets filtered out. The edges, the discomfort, the voices that don't clean up well for sponsors. And in 50's mind, Jay didn't just accept that trade-off. He became the guy deciding which parts of the culture were worth presenting. That's why 50 keeps circling back to gatekeeping. Not as an insult, but as a warning. Gatekeepers don't have to be evil. They just have to believe they know what's best. And Jay absolutely believes that. You see it in how he moves. He rarely responds directly. He lets institutions validate him. He allows awards, partnerships, and silence to speak for him. That's not weakness, that's strategy. But strategy only works as long as people trust the system backing it. And that trust is cracking. Not because of one Super Bowl rumor. Not because of one viral clip. But because more artists and fans are starting to recognize a familiar pattern. The louder you play by the rules, the more access you get. The more unpredictable you are, the more invisible you become. 50 refuses to play by those rules. He never cleaned up his image. Never softened his language. Never pretended to be palatable. Even when he crossed into television and film, he brought the same aggression, the same chaos, the same willingness to make executives uncomfortable. And instead of apologizing, he doubled down. That's why his success bothers people in power. Because it proves you don't need institutional approval to win. You just need leverage. And leverage is something Jay understands better than anyone. That's why their conflict feels like a mirror. Two men who came from the same era, survived the same industry, but chose opposite paths once they made it. One climbed into the system and reshaped it from the inside. The other stayed outside and kept throwing rocks at the glass. Neither approach is wrong, but only one gets to decide who stands on the biggest stages. That's the tension nobody wants to say out loud. And now, with Jay's silence finally bending, the pressure is shifting. Because once you're seen as the gatekeeper, every closed door becomes suspicious. Every absence becomes intentional. Every award becomes political. That's not a position Jay ever wanted publicly. He wanted to be seen as the proof, the example, the blueprint, not the filter. But history doesn't care about intent. It cares about outcomes. And the outcome right now is this. A growing part of the culture is asking whether hip-hop's biggest wins came at the expense of its rawest voices, whether the price of respectability was control, and whether the people who fought their way into elite rooms remembered to leave the door open behind them. 50 is forcing that conversation by being impossible to ignore. Every joke, every podcast clip, every offhand comment is a reminder that the culture didn't crown gatekeepers, it crowned disruptors. And while Jay may sit at the top of the mountain, 50 keeps yelling from below, making sure nobody forgets how the climb really works. That's why this story doesn't end with a diss track. It ends with perception. Because if the culture decides Jay represents control more than freedom, his legacy changes. And if the culture decides 50 represents truth more than chaos, his words carry more weight than any institution's approval. And that's the real risk. Not beef, not rumors, not viral clips, but the possibility that the narrative shifts in a way no boardroom can reverse. Because once people start questioning who holds the keys, they stop asking for permission altogether. And in hip-hop, that kind of awakening has always been the most dangerous thing of all. And that's where this moment hangs, unresolved, uncomfortable, and very intentional. Because nothing about what's happening right now feels accidental. The clips going viral, the old interviews resurfacing, the silence getting louder. This isn't just nostalgia beef being reheated for clicks. This is two philosophies colliding in real time, with the entire culture watching and quietly picking sides. One side believes power is best exercised quietly, behind closed doors, through influence that never has to explain itself. The other believes power should be loud, disruptive, and impossible to sanitize, even if it makes people uncomfortable. And the wild part is, hip-hop has always needed both, until one starts trying to control the other. What happens next won't come from a diss record or a press release. It'll come from who the culture chooses to believe, from which version of success feels more honest, from which silence feels strategic, and which feels like avoidance. So pay attention to what doesn't get said. Watch who keeps getting invited, and who mysteriously doesn't. Notice how certain stories disappear while others get amplified. That's where the real answers live. Because this story isn't finished. It's just paused. And when it resumes, it won't be on a stage or a mic. It'll be in the moves nobody admits making.